A warm welcome, Red Eyes members. Thank you for being here. Nice to have you along for our second segment, the continuation of our excellent program with Neil Kramer from the Cleaver.blogspot.com. And in this segment, we're going to begin to talk about the increasing polarity of consciousness, how those who walk the path of selfhood, gnosis, and integrity find it harder and harder to relate to those with lower consciousness. And I think a lot of you guys and gals out there listening can relate to that, the difficulty of even talking to the people around you, either at work or even your family. So Neil, if you will, tell us a little bit about the increasing polarity of consciousness.
Sure. As time proceeds and as evolution of consciousness proceeds, one of the things that has been predicted and mapped out many years ago by various cultures, including the Mayans and the Toltecs, is a division, as they called it, because you have to put into mind that when you look at a lot of these things, and anybody who's into kind of alternative history and the works of like Michael Tsarian and Ralph Ellis and Graham Hancock, you have to understand that a lot of the time the language of the people from thousands of years ago is in itself a barrier, not just in its interpretation, but in what was their word for consciousness, what was their terminology for polarity. So sometimes, particularly I've been looking at Hopi mythology recently, and they describe this great division and this chasm, and you've got two parties kind of standing on either side of it, and one group of people are afraid and are looking backwards to the village and thinking, this is horrible, something's coming, I can feel it, the sky's changing, there's a blue star in the sky, there's great tribulation upon us. And the other people are thinking, this is interesting, okay, what's coming? Because the system we've got is okay and is nice, but we're ready to move. And that is a version of polarity of consciousness, which has been again mapped out in a slightly different way by the Mayans, which was very well illustrated by a guy called Ian Zell-Lungold, who I talked about last December with you guys. Seems like a million years ago now. And unfortunately he died, quite a young guy, and a lot of great work sort of disappeared into the field with him. So I guess we'll have to wait for the shift before we can connect back with him again. But for now, he's not available to us. He's probably doing more exciting things elsewhere. But right. one thing he did leave with us was the fact that this polarity, this consciousness polarity, will mean essentially that the good things are going to get better and the bad things are going to get worse. And if you look at this on a geopolitical scale, it's very simple and easy to see that. You don't need to be a genius to look at the ridiculous puppet show of Clinton and Obama and all the rest of them. It's not solutions, it's darkness and it's stupidity. And even if, without getting into the Obama debate, even if he is a good guy, he hasn't got a chance in hell, so you have to concentrate on more enlightened things. So as consciousness polarizes, it's best felt not on that stage, not through a screen, whether it's a laptop or a TV or whatever. It's best perceived in your own life. And one of the things that I observed, particularly this summer actually, although I've been observing it for maybe 25 years, but it was really highlighted this summer. Me and a very good friend of mine, we went down to Glastonbury and Avebury, and we looked at a lot of crop circles and stuff, which is a bit of a passion of mine. And we looked at some amazing designs and listened to some lectures. We went to a conference down there and all kinds of cool stuff. And in the small town of Glastonbury itself, and this is something we both commented on, we felt such a huge polarization amongst the community there. On the one hand, Glastonbury, which is also known as the Isle of Avalon, is somewhat of a pilgrimage site for people who seek to enlighten and educate themselves on a number of different levels. So there's quite a few New Agers down there who just float around and so on, and that's okay. But there's also some serious researchers down there. There's some scientists who go down there to look at, cutting edge fringe material that they probably have to be in disguise to even go into the, the lecture hall to listen to it, really. So you've got this great cosmopolitan bunch of people anyway, and you can certainly find somebody interesting to talk to compared to most of society. But what we observed was, at the same time, we'd go to these things and we'd visit the circles and so on. And when we'd come back and we'd go out in the night and have a drink and something to eat and stuff. And at the other end of town, if you like, not physically but consciously, there were a bunch of people who seemed to almost be regressing and devolving with quite a kind of hard, aggressive exterior to them, who almost seemed to resent the consciousness that was blossoming at the other side of the scale. And it was a very, very strange phenomenon, and it took me a while to process it. At first I just thought, well, obviously you're going to look at a bunch of people walking around all excitedly talking about this, that, and the other, and think, oh, what are they on? What are they doing? It's stupid. Let's watch the football match and, have a beef burger or whatever. So that's fine. But as I kind of came back from this journey, came back home, I began to process it a little bit more intelligently, and I understood that it was really another teaching down there, as well as the obvious teachings of sitting in front of lecturers and my own discussions and presentations and all the rest of it. It was also a teaching to see the effect that raised consciousness has on the community in which it emanates from. So I took that as very much a kind of microcosm of what we may expect to see at a much greater level,
right,
as the shift happens. So it was good in one way and bad in another. Good in that it was instructive, and bad in that there was certainly a lot of tension in that community. I mean, you have to be pretty perceptive to see it, and not everybody was picking up on that, but a few people I talked to who sat around and they said, it feels different here. It feels, as the information grows and the consciousness of the delegates and the people who come here and the sort of New Age pilgrims, as that improves, the other side of the community seem to regress and get worse and worse. And I believe that is perhaps a sign of things to come, because consciousness, it's a bit like air pressure. When you get a pocket of pressure, the wind rushes to that place.
Yeah.
And you get a low pressure and high pressure. And it felt quite organic when we were there, and I felt that this movement of consciousness almost had a life of its own. And as there was a great presence at one end, there was a real, depreciation of it at the other end, and it seemed to disappear and get sucked out into the ether. So it's very, very much as I say, a teaching, a small but representative set of symbols to say this is maybe something you can expect to see. So you've got that on one hand. On the other hand, what I wanted to say about this was, particularly having kind of listened to a lot of the shows on Red Ice and one or two other stations that have similar content. It's always interesting to me to hear people kind of speak personally about their lives, because they, we hear a lot of cool theories and stuff, and I'm, as deep as anyone else in kind of projecting my consciousness onto, various platforms and various frameworks and saying, and this is how this fits together and this is what this means. But it's equally interesting to say, okay, well, how do you go on in your life? How do you relate to your people and your mother and your father and your brothers and sisters and your girlfriends and your wives and husbands? And as this polarity increases, it's not just in the sort of academic and social circle, but it's also in the sort of intimate, close circle of your friends and family. And even people who have a high degree of intelligence and a high degree of social responsibility, even those people, it is becoming increasingly difficult to relate to anybody who does not have high consciousness.
Yes.
So I don't mean in a kind of super Zen way. I just mean in the sense that people who work on themselves and people who do not work on themselves are growing further and further apart.
Yes.
And some of the things that used to annoy me, which bad TV and bad news programs and all that kind of stuff, that I used to tolerate and just think, oh, well, that's just garbage, never mind. It's kind of like intolerable now, to the extent where I rarely switch the TV on anymore.
Right.
And for me to observe anybody in anywhere sucked into it is highly annoying now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've observed my own reaction to that. So one would think that as you're understanding deep, and you think, okay, well, I know you're doing that, I know why you're doing that, and it's okay. But I'm not even talking about people in my own personal life here. I mean, people I've gone to friends' houses and seen them sucked into, you know, pockets of low consciousness in whatever shape or form that takes, like, you know, bad literature, bad music, bad books, rubbish information, misinformation. And I think that seems to increase. So I would say that the control system is certainly ramping up its efforts to counterbalance the increase in consciousness by throwing out so much high gravity junk, you wouldn't believe it. And it seems to be sucking people in, you know, and as I say, even good people. And just to very quickly touch on this LRP flash analysis, a flash analysis is a sort of psychological tool to make a very quick assessment of somebody, and it's sometimes used in military environments where somebody's been exposed to trauma in the field, and you do a quick psychological flash analysis, say, yeah, you're ready to go home, or no, you're ready, get your weapon tooled up and off you go again. LRP is my terminology for left brain, right brain, and psychic. So L for left brain, R for right brain, P for psychic. And if you consider a 0 to 5 score for each term, it's a way of looking at somebody who seems to be of interest or somebody you're concerned about and score them. So, you know, you could say, okay, well, left brain, you're pretty good, so 4 out of 5, which is, you know, an excellent score, which means you're intelligent, you're smart, you process information well, you know, you're educated to some degree, maybe you have some cultural references as well. Your R score may be 1 because you're not very creative, you're not very spontaneous, you don't have any dynamism in your life, and your psychic is 0, okay, because you don't believe in that stuff, so your belief system limits you to just a reductionist, mechanistic response to life. So, you know, you can get used to looking at someone and go, okay, you're a 410, yeah. And the relevance of that to this, because obviously it's just a technique and it's not incredibly accurate, it's only a very brief cursory sketch of somebody, it doesn't stand up to, you know, real scrutiny. But what it does is it illustrates the point that where there is an imbalance in that holistic view of the brain, so you can consider the psychic function as the ability to achieve uplink. If there's no uplink and there's no creative emotional content, then the dominance of the ego in that L score is going to mean that those people are much more susceptible to the misinformation and the disinformation of the control system. The difference between misinformation and disinformation, by the way, misinformation, if you kind of check this out on a reference site, is neutral. So people can make mistakes, or bad information can, you know, just organically grow into the technosphere. Disinformation is kind of intentionally bad, misleading information. So the control system uses a clever blend of these two things, and it puts, you know, purposefully thick people into positions of responsibility, so they will leak out misinformation which will trip themselves up and confuse other people. And on the other hand, obviously they have psyops teams who pump out purposefully, you know, wicked disinformation to throw people off track. And it's very, very, very cleverly psychologically modeled. So they will have a system very similar to this LRP flash, which will say, okay, we want to target the people who are, you know, young, sort of 25 to 45, successful, have expendable incomes, and we want to steer them well away from any notions of spirituality or transcendence or whatever. So it's kind of like a psychological demographic survey that is done, you know, moment by moment in tiny increments to incredible accuracy. And they do that to disinform and separate people. But we can do that to understand why, and to stop yourself going insane when you look at someone and say, God, you know, you're intelligent, can't you see that this is this? And, you know, you're not interested in the fact that this is coming and it's going to mean something for your life. You know,